remember that. So I want to welcome you and hand over to him to take us through. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. Lydia, I'll forgive you for not learning how to pronounce my name very readily. I'll forgive you because you are Frafra. So if you didn't learn Ashanti history, you are forgiven. But having said so, I remember in GBC, when I went there, the newsreaders were pronouncing names of certain Europeans, particularly in the Eastern and Central European states, not very properly. One day, a Bulgarian ambassador that I met at a reception told me that, Mr. Director General, the way your people pronounce my name, I couldn't even recognize myself. So when I went back to the following morning, I called Mr. Anaglate, who was Director of News and Current Affairs, and said, listen, the best way to learn these names is to get your people to call the embassies so that they will pronounce those names which are made up of all consonants, for you. But anyway, today is Radio Day, and let us remember that radio has now entered its second century. After the first radio broadcast in Philadelphia in the United States in 1919, we are in the second century of this great, marvelous medium of mass communication. And with all the technology that are coming in and on and on and on, radio still remains the most popular medium of mass communication. Indeed, because of the multitude and complexity of communications technologies, many people would refer to radio to authenticate information they get on many of the other technologies of communication. And so our work continues to be onerous, demanding, and also respected. And that is why a day like this ought to be celebrated very well, both for the achievements, for the challenges, and for the responsibilities of those of us who work with this medium. Now, in Ghana here, today, in this moment we are in, media, particularly, all media, or the media environment is going through a lot of stresses. There are many things happening that amount to pressure of a certain negative type on media. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen the state, the police, arresting a number of people on radio, television stations, but also on social media, and charging them with this law of publishing false news. That area is a complex area. The question of that law, the police's arrests of these people, and then the reasons why the police are arresting these people, they are all a very complex issue. But there's one element in that I think we should all advise ourselves about, and that is the importance the absolute necessity for us in this business to be responsible to our audiences, to our communities. And I believe this is what trust, the theme of today, is all about. If you are not responsible, even in your family, your children cannot trust you. Trust is based on responsibility, responsiveness, care, being sensitive to your environment and to people who depend on you and who you relate to. However, apart from what the state is doing, Adan Radio particularly is going through a particular form of stress, which is not coming from the state, which is coming from, as everybody says, unknown assailants. That reminds us that when we talk about press freedom, media freedom, it is not only the state that can be a source of tension, a source of threat to press freedom. The so-called, there are many cases all around the globe of so-called non-state actors being direct threats to press freedom, and we ought to be aware of that. And that brings us to the concept of community radio. I mean, we all know, and those of you in that field or that sector, we say glibly that community radio is for the marginalized. Yes, it is for the marginalized, but what does that mean? As far as I'm concerned, that concept of marginalization immediately, instantly introduces the idea that community radio takes sides in social justice matters. It takes sides in issues of rights of people in a community. And Adan Radio is an example of a station taking sides on the rights, the well-being, the welfare of not everybody in that community, but a segment of that community. In other words, community radio is also a class question. Community radio takes sides. It's not just there. And in any case, all radio stations take sides, as we see in Ghana here. There are radio stations for this party, radio stations for that party, radio stations for this social group, radio stations for this social group. And community radio, when we talk about marginalization, means community radio must take sides. The concept, therefore, immediately tells us that community radio is a concept of the marginalized. It's a concept of where a radio station stands in the whole question of social justice. Now, we are here today. Basically, when we talk about trust, it connotes also where we stand, what we do. But the panelists who will come today will do more and perhaps a better expatiation of this concept of trust, which is the theme for today's Radio Day celebration. Before I call Professor Audrey Gadjepo to start the program, let me say that there's slight adjustments on the program you have, and take note. The program was to be started by Mr. Abdraman Diallo, the country representative of UNESCO, talking about names and their pronunciation. When our honorable UN rep comes, let's find out how he pronounces his name. Because as far as I'm concerned, it is Jallo and not Diallo. You know, so those of you who do sports on the radio stations, the Liverpool player's name is not Sadio Mane, Sadio Mane. Note that. We are copying blindly, uncritically from the West all the time. So before we do that, Mr. Abdraman is held up and he'll come back and join us a little later. So without further ado, as a teacher and a communicator, I like talking too much. I'll stop here and let the panelists start. So Professor Audrey Gadjeko. Professor Gadjeko also perhaps doesn't need much introduction. We've been colleagues at the School of Department of Communication Studies at Lagos. She's been a dean as a full professor in communication studies, and let us applaud that.
Thank you very much, my good friend and partner in crime often, my mentor, Professor Kwame Kaikari. I'd like to say a very warm good morning to everybody here. Particularly, I'm excited that both Papa Radio and Mama Radio are here, and I see some really good old friends, including the head of GCRN now, Lydia, here today. I want to start by noting that we've come a very long way. Nearly 3 decades or so ago, when radio was a state monopoly, and when the only game in town was GBC's regional and national stations. And it bears reminding also, on an occasion like this, that even though media pluralism was expected right after redemocratization in 1993, it took the renegade action of an unauthorized radio station known as Radio I to press home the need to liberalize the airwaves. So we salute Radio I for paving the way for the 684 radio stations that now enjoy authorization from the NCA. According to NCA figures, for the last quarter of 2021, authorization had been granted to 510 commercial radio stations, 114 community radio stations, 31 public radio stations, 24 campus radio stations, and 5 public foreign radio stations. And they tell us that 489 of these authorizations are now currently on air. I must note, however, that some of what passes as community radio is in contention. And I must also note that even as we see the numbers of commercial radio stations and said 114 community radio stations that have been authorized, there are still pending community radio initiatives from I don't know how long ago that still haven't received their authorizations, and I think it's something we have to work on and continue to look for. From the NCA's official statistics, it's clear that distribution is also uneven, with Ashanti region having the most stations on air, 79, followed by Greater Accra, 62, Western region, 56. The newer regions, Ahafo, Savannah, and Oti, have 8, 8, and 9 respectively. So they have the least stations. Still, I appreciate the fact that all regions, including the newer ones, are served by radio in Ghana, because it confirms what Afrobarometer's Africa-wide surveys of 2019-2020 found, that radio remains by a substantial margin the mass medium most commonly used by people looking for news. The widespread availability and reliance on radio also affirms the remarkable of the medium, even in the face of increasing accessibility of online and social media and diminishing advertising revenue. In rural communities particularly, radio is sometimes the only reliable source of news and official information. Importantly, Afrobarometer finds that radio remains the most democratic of all media because it has narrower gaps in access on the basis of location, on the basis of gender, on the basis of education, and on the basis of age of all other media. This implies that marginalized citizens, in particular, are able to enjoy the benefits of radio more than any other medium. So given these facts, it is safe for us to conclude that radio is essential for the deepening of our democracy. It is crucial for giving voice to citizens, irrespective of their disadvantaged positioning, and for helping to bring community priorities to attention of the ruling elite, and also for building communities. Which brings me to the issue of trust, which is the theme of the celebrations. In order to fulfill its mission, in order to play normative roles such as gathering and disseminating reliable information with which citizens can make informed choices, for example, whether and where to get COVID-19 vaccines, who and which party will best serve the interests of the community, etc., or whose behavior is harming community development, what policies are inimical to the interests of, say, farmers, which public and elected officials should we hold accountable for what failures, etc. In order to be able to fulfill these roles, radio must be trusted. Currently, several studies point to a crisis of trust in some of society's central institutions, including government and the media, two institutions traditionally expected to hold society together. And it's useful to conceive of the link between trust and radio in two ways. One, the capacity of radio to help build trust in a country's institutions, to help build trust in policies and measures, e.g. COVID vaccination, for example, to help build trust in the social systems meant to bring improvements in the lives of citizens. But only radio stations that enjoy the trust of people can play this trust-building role effectively. And the second way of looking at trust is understanding trust in relation to the credibility and goodwill that the institution of radio, generally speaking, or a particular radio station enjoys within society. So those who listen to radio must believe that it is a credible and reliable medium that works in the interest of the community. Trust in a radio station is earned when it is transparent, when it's perceived as giving the full picture of events, no censorship, when it is seen as adding value, being accurate, not motivated by personal and commercial gains. Trust is also gained when people believe that those who are giving them the information, whether they are professional journalists or radio volunteers, as we see in community radio, live by their professional standards. But as I alluded to briefly earlier, recent studies show that there's a growing distrust of media worldwide. In 2017, for example, Afrobarometer recorded a sharp decline in trust in media on the continent. Among 21 African countries surveyed in 2016-2018, Ghana ranked well below the average, 47%, in its support for media freedom then. The operative word is then, and I'll tell you why. But I think it's worth quoting some of the findings on Ghana. What did they find? That about 1 in 3 Ghanaians, so that's about 36%, support full media freedom. This was a sharp drop from 55% in 2014. Then a majority, 57%, said that the government should have the right to prevent the publication of information it deems harmful to society. A majority of Ghanaians also said they trust information from public media, 60%, government sources, 58%, and private media, 57%, at least somewhat. Fewer Ghanaians trusted information from social media sources. Finally, 3/4 of Ghanaians believed at the time that at least some members of the public and private media are corrupt, including almost 1 in 5 citizens who say that most or all media are corrupt. In that survey, it was established that Ghanaians widely rely on radio and television for their news. So radio is sort of implicated in the results. But encouragingly, in 2020, Afrobarometer surveys, mostly because of concerns about aggression and intolerance towards the media by state and non-state actors, saw more support for media freedoms, again, in the surveys from Ghana. Although it wasn't clear from what I read whether people had increased their trust in the media generally. And I like to say that several reasons account for public distrust of the media. Part of the results from the sheer number of what we now regard as news media. So in Ghana, where there's a plethora of radio stations, where there's a lack of transparency in who owns some and the different professional standards, it becomes easy to tar all radio stations with one brush and use the actions of a few to dismiss the entire institution as untrustworthy and deserving of stronger external control. We've witnessed how some political leaders, even in so-called mature democracies, have tried to delegitimize the entire media as purveyors of fake news, especially when the media tries to hold them up to public scrutiny. Another challenge, dear friends, contributing to mistrust of media is the rise of disinformation. Deliberately misleading news stories now compete with, and sometimes they crowd out, accurate stories and plant doubt in the minds of people about the reliability of the news they get in general from different platforms. Imagine if citizens believe that they cannot rely on radio for a truthful account of political activities. Then, in a crisis, then that is a crisis, not only for radio, but also for our democratic institutions. Number 3, political polarization. In Ghana, it takes the form of NDC MPP camps that some radio stations in Ghana play on, and the fact that they also constantly accommodate paid political, social commentators who are brought on air to discuss important national issues from a purely partisan lens. Sometimes these discussions, whether deliberately or not, allow political operatives to get away with propaganda, falsehoods, and utterances that further pollute the civic space. And related to this is excessive opinionating and the confusion that creates between news and opinion. Journalistic codes, including GJAs, urge separation of facts from opinion, but often the distinction between what is fact and what is opinion is blurred. And the 5th contributory factor to the crisis of trust in media is a lack of self-regulation and the risks that provides for authorities to find a convenient ruse to clamp down on media in the name of external regulation. Media Foundation for West Africa's language monitoring project during elections, for example, names and shames some of the worst offenders of unacceptable behavior on our airwaves, and it demonstrates the dire need for radio stations to better self-regulate. Indeed, you know, journalism practice, and Professor Kaikari pointed to that, is facing a crisis right now. A crisis where there's a clampdown on radio stations, but also a crisis of trust, you know. And I was struck when I read a news report that one of the chief advocates in the discussions that are happening at this period, Newsfile Samson Ladiayenini, someone who regularly goes to court to defend journalists, is reported as stating that people are engaging in criminal activity in the name of journalism. That's a crisis of trust. And the final contributory factor is a lack of regulation for the broadcast sector. Despite promises upon promises, we still do not have a broadcast bill to help mitigate some of these challenges. Now, attacks on trusted media, which I must come to at this point, which is a very topical issue of concern in this country, the fact that journalists, media houses have been attacked, and that attacks have been on the rise, not just in this period, but for a few years now in particular. The shocking attack on Radio Ada is only one of such an example, and I know that is going to be discussed right after my presentation, so I will not go into it. I also know that Mr. George Sapo is going to talk about safety for journalists, so he probably will have better illustrations to share. But I think that we must condemn such attacks because sometimes they are aimed at radio stations precisely because they're trusted and getting some level of traction when they play their watchdog roles, much to the discomfort of some powerful elites in society. I think it's also important to take note of what is being perceived as the creeping criminalization of speech following some high-profile arrests of journalists by the police. This arrest flag concerns about deteriorating speech rights, but at the same time, they also flag concerns about deteriorating civility on our airwaves, both of which pose threats to our democratic growth. We must be minded that governments take easy advantage of growing skepticism of the public of unfettered, unregulated media to clamp down on media freedoms. And when they do that, they also close the democratic space for robust critique of government actions, not only by journalists, but citizens who contribute to public discourse, including on radio. So I want to conclude my presentation by pondering what to do. How do we build and sustain trust? And I think that in light of some of my observations, it's crucial that we encourage and support radio stations, like community radio stations, but many more other radio stations. If commercial radio stations are the majority, we must encourage them to build credibility within society as well. Stations that build and sustain trust within the communities they operate in and which enjoy the backing of the populace, especially stations that are trusted are those who enjoy the backing of the populace in times of crisis. Without radio that is engaged and trusted, people are in the dark about what their governments are doing and feel more disconnected from each other because there's no common forum to promote and celebrate communal events. We know from research that the influence a media organization has on an audience member depends on the level of trust that person has in that medium. We also know that it takes time to build and earn trust, and that trust is like glass. It breaks, and once broken can never be the same. That is why trust is so crucial in conversations on democratic reversals. There are some common factors that can undermine trust between a radio station and its audiences. And studies suggest, for example, that when people perceive their news as being censored to accommodate power elites, when they think there's lack of respect for their cultures and languages, especially also if too many programs are being broadcast in languages that are not indigenous to the area, they develop low levels of trust in their radio stations. Trust, therefore, starts with making a conscious effort for journalists to understand and empathize with the communities they cover. As some have said, and I like this quote, if you are not in a relationship with someone, if you haven't proved your value to them, then you don't have their trust. So to build and sustain trust requires that radio stations be relatable and accountable to the communities they serve, and act with an understanding that their primary role is the facilitation of public deliberation, community connection, and democratic participation aimed at building more equitable, better societies. Importantly, trust is achieved by providing facts and helping people perform their democratic duties. And although from time to time, even the most conscientious radio operator can make mistakes, when that happens, the station should be prepared to admit that mistake and make the necessary corrections. That's how you build trust. And finally, Mr. Chairman, trust is only possible if radio stations are perceived as independent of political and business interference, if they avoid partisanship and report facts in a way that more clearly communicates what people need to know with the independence and commitment that people ought to expect of their trusted radio. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Audrey. We are going to have a discussion of these presentations, so I will not bore you with trying to summarize anything. There's one thing, a number of things presented which personally are of very great interest. And one of them is the question of language and trust. We all know that community radio in Ghana and elsewhere are media that really encourage the use of local languages. I mean, until, for instance, until 1985, so many languages of the northern sector of this country were never used. In fact, until community radio started with the initiatives of Radio Adan, the majority of the languages and dialects in our country were not heard on air. In fact, the day that we were launching Radio Adan in Adan, I remember what the Paramount Chief said. He said, until Radio Adan came, and I'm sure Mr. Lawe here will recall, until Radio Adan came, we didn't know that we belonged to Ghana because we did not hear ourselves by ourselves. This is a very eloquent testimony of language and also of the importance of radio in our communities. So thank you, Professor Audrey Gajepo. Now, we did some shuffle on your program, but we're going back because our honorable country representative of UNESCO is here, and we'll invite him to come and express his greetings from that great institution, UNESCO. I am deliberately refusing to mention his name because just as you walked in the door, if you heard, I was saying that we will plead with you to tell us how truly your father mentioned your name when you were being named. You see, because when I go to Gambia, when I go to Senegal, Anglophone, Francophone, and when I go to Guinea, the name is spelled Diallo, but I hear people pronouncing it in a certain way. When I was growing up, there was a famous Guinean diplomat who was the first Secretary General of the OAU. We used to pronounce his name Diallo. A Guinean friend said, no, I don't know. He may have been a wrong kind of Guinean, but please, you come and tell us your name. Why am I saying this? They are going to pronounce the name on radio, and we want them to do the right thing. So thank you, Mr. Representative.
Thank you very much, Professor Kari. Well, I didn't expect to start by explaining about my name. Well, the pronunciation, I would pronounce it, I'm from Niger. In Niger, we say Diallo. My name is Abdurrahman Diallo. Diallo. And actually, there are two nuances. You have the Diallo, you have in Senegal, in Mali, even in Cameroon, you will have Diallo. It's a Fulani name. If you are holding Diallo name, you are to Fulani, whether you are Fulani or you are married with a Fulani who gave you the name. So it's a Fulani name, typical Fulani name. So that's why it's common. And we see it all over West Africa, Central Africa. Now the variant Diallo that we have in Gambia, a little bit in Senegal. Well, it's I would say the same, and it's evolution and vernacular transformation, appropriation. So it's all about languages and traveling through the different countries and region. So, Professor, I don't know if I responded. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Distinguished participant at the high table, recognize, of course, our Kwame Kari, our brother from National Media Commission, Mr. George Sarpong, Professor Audrey Gadjepo, Madame Lydia Adjoy from Ghana Community Radio Network, who is hosting us actually and who is organizing this event. Thank you very much and congratulations for this initiative. All members of Ghana Community Radio Network, dear friends of the media, it's a pleasure to be with you to continue, I will say, the celebration of this edition of Radio Day, which was actually last Sunday on February the 13th. And as a few of you are aware, last Monday we were at Ghana Institute of Journalism with the Minister of Information and other stakeholders, Ghana Journalists Association, Ghana Commission for UNESCO, and we deliberated on the theme Trust and Radio as it pertains to the Fourth Republic. And we celebrated the enormous contribution of radio to Ghana's democracy and the gradual policing of freedom of expression. It's a mixed atmosphere that does not augur well for freedom of expression. Mr. Chairman, freedom of expression is a fundamental human right that everyone must enjoy, and this ought to be respected. With your indulgence, allow me to Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 19 stated that everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression, and this right shall include freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, either orally, in writing, or print in the form of art, or through any other media of his/her choice. This means every human has the absolute right to express their view without being harassed or, worse scenario, murdered by any person, group of people, or any form of authority. In Ghana, Article 21 of the 1992 Constitution is explicit on the fundamental human rights of the Ghanaian citizenry. It profoundly states that all persons shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression, which shall include freedom of the press and the other media. It's on this backdrop that UNESCO is calling on citizens, duty bearers, and government to ensure that this provision is applied to its fullest effect. Mr. Chairman, among us this morning is the production team of Radio Ada, who were attacked for going about their lawful duties last month. For the first time, since actually assuming duties here in Ghana, in our role, we formally wrote to the National Media Commission, the Media Commission and the Minister of Information to activate our response through the coordinating mechanism for the safety of journalists. We reach out to management also of the Radio Ada to offer our support and petition the appropriate outfits to swiftly probe the matter and ensure that the perpetrators face the consequences of their wicked actions. This year, 2022, marks 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists. This occasion will be celebrated worldwide and discussed at the ministerial high-level conference in Vienna in next November. UNESCO will partner safety of journalists in Africa and the African Union, relevant bodies, to organize African regional discussions focused on the past and future of the UN Plan of Action to reflect on successes and difficulties encountered in the implementation of this plan and its three pillars: prevention, protection, and prosecution over the past decade. I wish to avail the opportunity to really thank National Media Commission for their work, for their leadership in this area, coordinating the platform. And they need our support, not only from UNESCO, but all other partners to ensure that this platform is fully operational and that it can respond timely to all our application seek for support. Mr. Chairman, the UNESCO office here in Accra and in our domain of competence of the communication and information this year is built on three pillars: freedom of expression, access to information, safety of journalists. Freedom of expression, access to information, safety of journalists. We will be working with all of you, with all the media fraternity and entities. We will be working also with judicial actors on freedom of expression and safety of journalists. We will deepen our engagement with National Media Commission on the monitoring mechanism for the safety of journalists. Mr. Chairman, I leave you with the following quotes. Freedom of opinion and freedom of expression are indispensable conditions for the full development of the person. They are essential for any society. They constitute the foundation stone for every free and democratic society. It's a quotation from Article 19 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. Yes, thank you. We are in Ghana. We are happy and privileged to be in a safe, secured, where we are enjoying freedom of expressions, and security. But it's not given. We have all to be vigilant and to play our part to ensure that it is maintained. And all of us citizens have a responsibility. On this note, Mr. Chairman, I wish you fruitful conversations, fruitful discussions, and I thank you for your attention. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Diallo. He ended with a very important note. And I would like to summarize that by quoting or paraphrasing an African American civil rights activist who said that democracy, and here we can talk about freedom of expression, is like taking a bath. You have to take it every day. What it means is that, and as he said, these things of freedom of expression rights are not given. It means that we must constantly fight to preserve, promote, advance, and expand them. Governments of all types around the globe, one day or another, may trample on citizens' freedom of expression for various reasons. The struggle to keep the rights we have should be a constant and should be something that we relentlessly uphold. Mr. George Sapon, Executive Secretary of the National Media Commission, has to go to some other engagement, I believe in Parliament or somewhere. So on your program, we want him to come and make his presentation on the issue of safety of journalists, as the UNESCO has. So, George.
Thank you very much, Prof. I want to stand on all the existing protocols, as we've said. But I think that in a forum like this, I could claim my full indulgences, because when I have Professor Kakari, Professor Gajepo, Mama and Papa here, and I've also seen Dr. Graham in the corner there, yes. And I've seen Sule. The reason why I mention all these names is that in the past 1 year or so, I've been concerned about the demography of our activism. If in this meeting, the key actors are still the people who initiated us into it. From my generation, I can see that the only person that I see actively, Kofi, was the team that were trained by the leaders I've spoken about. So the point I'm seeking to make is that perhaps after Sule's generation, and I'm not seeing too much. And so there's a certain risk that I'm concerned about. And I thought that I should put it on the table, that it is part of the crisis that is confronting us that we need to look at. The second thing is just a quick comment on the facts that Professor Gajepo was sharing with us about the importance of radio and how all of us get misled into playing that down. When we speak about social media and its growing effect, it is true. But I have been involved in the ITU processes. At home, I've been involved in the communications sector. And it seems to me that we are being completely misled by the statistics. As we stand here, in Ghana here, with all the figures that you hear, we still don't have more than 40% single SIM penetration. So when you hear the figures thrown around, you need to really understand what they mean about the claims. And I just want to conclude on that by saying that in the 2016 US elections, the eve of elections, there were more than just one day, more than 400,000 artificial bots on social media were activated. And the way they work by artificial intelligence is that they mimic human behavior. So you can use them on social media advocating a cause and you believe that these are human beings. We don't know the statistics here. What am I trying to say? Trustworthy content in media will still have to rely on radio and broadcasting for a very long time to come. And it's important that we understand the critical role we have to play. Coming back to the task that I was given, I would have really wished to start my commentary on the situation at Radio Adan, the attack. Unfortunately, because the matter is before the coordinated mechanism on the safety of journalists and we are still investigating, I would want to be very careful about that. But, and please, everybody here who is involved in Radio Adan, forgive me, especially those of you who were direct victims. I was uncannily happy about one element. That element is about, for those of you who followed National Media Commission recently, we had cause to caution one gentleman who was calling for an insurrection in the state. He had to face some kind of consequence from that action. Within that same period is when Radio Adan is attacked. So you have attacks on two completely distinct in the entire continuum of quality. Perhaps one of the worst behavior that you can see in broadcasting is what we saw from that gentleman. And then one of the best in the world is the quality of Radio Adan. That gets attacked. So the metaphor of the connection I'm making is that in this enterprise, nobody is safe. You get the point I'm making? Nobody is safe within that continuum. And I have been trying to understand a couple of things. I hope that within the next 2 weeks, we will close our investigations and share with everybody what we found. The mechanism that I just spoke about, which Mr. Diallo had also spoken about, is something that most of us here should be familiar with. It is collaborative work amongst all of us, the stakeholders, all of us within the media industry, NMC, the Ministry of Information, GIBA, GJ, PRIMPAG, GCRN is in, and then, of course, UNESCO. What we have done is to set up a secretariat that we hope would investigate abuses against journalists, work to prevent these abuses, and work towards the protection of journalists. With the support of the Ministry of Information, we have established a dedicated secretariat that would pursue these aims that we have just mentioned. The secretariat also has additional responsibility to research, gather information related to violations of freedom of expression, and respond to information needs of stakeholders, including civil society, government, media professionals. Some of you may recall that that was the process that we used to address the attack on the City FM team, particularly Caleb Kuda and Zoe Abubeidu. We are also still using that secretariat to pursue very actively matters relating to the killing of our brother and friend Ahmed Swale. Through that mechanism, we also worked with the National Communications Authority to develop some policy responses. So from this year, NCA has included in its system of authorization requirement that broadcasters or owners of broadcasting stations demonstrate practical measures to secure the safety of journalists working in their media houses. And you could easily lose your license if you fall short of taking practical steps to secure the safety of the journalist. And some of the requirements are physical infrastructure and the security systems that protect everybody. As part of this process, UNESCO has also supported us to hold 2 consultative meetings, one in Kumasi and one in Takoradi. We are hoping that we'll also be able to engage our friends in the other regions. There are a couple of things going on now that I want to share with you as part of the work in progress. We are trying to complete a specialized tracking system. It's an enterprise system of both Android and iOS mobile apps for the capture and submission of incidents relating to the safety of journalists. When completed, we hope that the system will offer permanent imprint of date and time for analysis. So this is how it works. If we are able to get a lot of people to uptake this, anytime any incident happened anywhere, you could very easily capture the incident and then it automatically uploaded onto our system. The GPS, working with the security agencies, the material could then real time get to the police, and because of the time and location stamping, the closest police station that is closest to you, that gets the information, then also gets the GPS direction so that they could very easily respond. So in the case of that incident, if we had a tracking system, all that would have happened is that if somebody within the building was able to just take a shot of this, perhaps the police would have arrived whilst the attackers were still in the premises. So this is the basic system that we are working on. We are also working towards publishing a practical guide and toolkit for journalists on safety issues. There are certain basic things that we as journalists can also do to secure our own safety, and particularly when we work together. Again, we are working towards a national charter for the safety of journalists, which would include a commitment by the media, public authorities, and journalists to work together to secure the safety of journalists. Again, we have on the table monitor institutional compliance with the national charter. So with the Ghana Police Service, with the Ghana Armed Forces, government agencies, we hope to sign this charter and then each one of us report on it at the end of the year about what they are doing internally to ensure this is done. I really believe that with the posture that the current IGP has, the Ghana Police Service will really commit to this. But there is something that we've not talked much about. When John Kudalo was IGP,